Let me bring in James Paterson, Liberal Senator for Victoria, and someone who's been strong and clear about China for a long while. Thanks for joining us again, James. Let's start with that ABC ploy. What on earth would that do to advance Australia's national interests in the region?
Chris, what the Labor Party has done today with their new Pacific policy is essentially copy our homework and say we're going to do everything that the coalition has done, just a little bit more. So there's no meaningful change with most of it. And to the extent to which there's any differences at all, they say they're going to subject the poor people of the Pacific to a few more episodes of Q&A and maybe a screening of hard quiz. I'm not sure that would have changed anything, any facts on the ground in the Pacific over the last 5 years, because it's not a lack of access to ABC News and current affairs which has caused the problems that we have in the Solomons or elsewhere in the Pacific. It's the fact that the Chinese government is willing to do things which no self-respecting liberal democracy governed by the rule of law, Australia included, would be willing to do in order to advance our interests. And that's the fundamental crux of the problem here. Labor Party is offering nothing new at all. Perhaps we shouldn't be surprised by this. They've been all over the shop when it comes to policy on the Pacific. Richard Marles' long and contradictory history on this has been well laid out in the Australian over the last few days.
Don't we need to see more frank and honest explanations of what's going on here from the government as well as Labor? We're tap dancing around what's really gone on here. Labor's blaming the government when it's a sovereign nation making a decision with another sovereign nation. But the government's been very reluctant to criticise openly and directly the Solomon Islands government. I mean, they've got to be called out here. Sogavare has sold his nation down the tube here, hasn't he?
We've made it very clear that we don't think the decision that the government has made is in the interest of regional security and stability. We don't think it's in Australia's national interest, and we don't even think it's in the interest of the Solomon Islands government, particularly if it were to lead to what people fear is a permanent Chinese military presence or a naval base on the territory of the Solomon Islands. I welcome the fact that Prime Minister Sogavare has said that won't happen. That's a commitment he's made not just to us and others in the region, but to his own people, and I think they will have an expectation he live up to that. Because if he were to agree to that, I think it would fundamentally compromise the sovereignty of the Solomon Islands and damage its independence and self-determination. And that's not something we want to see or anyone else should want to see.
You're involved in the parliamentary oversight of our intelligence agencies. Is this an intelligence failure? Do the Australian intelligence agencies fail to detect what was unfolding here?
No, I don't agree with that. We have had very good coverage for some time of China's plans and intentions for the region. We have understood their ambition to expand their military presence in the region, and we have been warning about that for some time. Richard Marles might like to downplay the risk of that, as he did in his pamphlet last year, but most other people who observe these issues have understood this risk. It's the whole reason why the government launched the Pacific Step Up about 5 years ago, because we recognised how important the Pacific was to our national security. And it's the reason why we relocated our international aid program from the far-flung places around the world that Kevin Rudd sent it to in the quest for getting votes to be elected to the UN Security Council, and instead focused it in our own neighbourhood where it can do the most good and where it's most directly tied to our national interests.
Senator, thanks for joining us again.
Thanks, Chris.